All right. Share this out. Be right back. Beautiful. All right. Here we are. So, tonight I thought, since it's been a while since I've done a live post, it might be fun to have a look at the Next War from SBI, the Mark Herman and crew classic. Let's call it a classic. And also, if we have time, we'll have a look at Liberty Roads as well, which I just finished playing a kind of a 6-turn scenario, and then we stopped and we've reset and played the first turn of the next one, next campaign, and it's quite entertaining. Let me just, like I'm sitting in the dark there. I'm not sure if you can hear and see well. If you can't, let me know. Hey, Tony, man, how you doing? It's a pity we couldn't play tonight, but I wasn't sure what time I was going to be able to get online and do stuff. Stigler, what's going on, man? Good to see you. All right, so let's have a little chat about the next war. Big box, right? Lots of counters. I forget how many maps, a bunch of maps. I don't want to go through components too much and spend time on that. I do want to talk about kind of try and use my standard guideline that I've been using in the last 2 or 3 written AARs as a means to kind of explore what the game system is like, the decisions you need to make, and things like that. So, but what I do want to give you a feel for is, first of all, there is a weight of articles about the game. There's a lot of critical commentary about the game as well, because it does incite very distinct feelings, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Counter sheets, all classic SBI style stuff, and the maps are all Simonson Stark Beauty. I think there's 3 maps and then 2 smaller maps or something like that. You can see those there, Czechoslovakia, etc. And I've got all the counters. I've actually got it packed up in here in 2 trays. There's a lot of counters. Everything's kind of down at the battalion scale, except for the Soviets. So lots and lots of stuff, and it's all good stuff that's in here. And there's a rich pantheon of counters to play with and goof around with. Kyle, good to see you. JTM, what is up? And Jason, hey man. All right, okay, so it looks like we're doing okay with sound and all the rest of it, and I thought I'd just say hi to everybody there. I probably won't jump in and say hi to everybody along the way. Save some questions up, and we'll get to them, and hopefully I can answer them. So let's talk about the game. You know, initially when you set this thing up and you look at it, you go, "Oh, I'm the theater commander," and I think that would be the decision space that you would expect to be in. But really, you're dealing down in, so if there's North Hag, Centag, and whatever they call it, the Southern one, Southern Command, you're really down in the weeds in each of those commands, making fairly detailed decisions about what goes on in the game. As you all probably know, it's a hypothetical of World War III, pretty much done at the battalion and brigade regiment level for NATO and divisional level for the Soviets. Lots and lots of air, lots and lots of SAMs and AA, and lots of chrome that can be applied to the game as well. So it's a pretty rich effort designed in 78 to give you those command decisions to allow you to experience the what if that might have occurred way back when. So that set of challenges that you face is pretty significant. As the Soviet player, you've got to decide where you're going to attack, who you're going to attack with, what allies are going to come along with you, and will they all stay with you? Are you going to leverage special forces and air and chemical attacks and all this other stuff early in the game or late in the game? Are you going to try and use nukes? There's lots and lots of different decision points in the game as you get started, and I think it's probably one of those great games where making a faulty opening turn can probably determine the fate of your experience in the game as you go through the exercise. The game has so in that role as sort of regional commander or Centag, North Hag commander, you're faced with the choices on the NATO side of how are you going to manage all of the different elements and the different nations, and where are you going to draw your defensive lines? When should you retreat? Do you need to retreat? Can you counterattack? Probably not. So lots of choices to be made on that side as well. From an intelligence perspective, it's interesting in that you're not really, I don't believe you're supposed to be looking at folks' stacks. Air allocation, kind of the Soviets go first. That causes, really gives the NATO player a little bit of a leg up in terms of they can see. Well, make sure they do actually go at the same time, or is it? I think the Soviets go first, but then again, I could be thinking about the Third World War. Let me see if I can find the sequence of play here real quickly. Joint nuclear planning phase, air allocation. Yeah, no, both sides secretly allocate. So it is simultaneous. So there's a whole game here in the air war, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But so there's some things where you have limited intelligence. You can't look at stacks. You're not supposed to be looking at the where the units are, I guess, over on the air bases and things like that. Arguably, we could talk all night about all the different levels of Spetsnaz and sleeper cells and all that sort of fun stuff, and who knew what when and what year it was all being fought and all that sort of fun stuff. And that drives a lot of the contention in the way the game plays out and the way the system's designed, I guess. So somewhat limited intelligence. And then the victory conditions, I think, are pretty standard, right? I mean, if you run the Third World War and you haven't, as a Soviet player, and you haven't captured Frankfurt, and you haven't got to or across the Rhine, you haven't forced all the miners in the north out of the game, then you suck and you shouldn't be winning, right? If you're NATO and you've held on to Frankfurt, or you've not collapsed beyond the Rhine, you've managed to keep some of the miners in the game, then you're probably doing okay and you're going to eke out a tactical victory or something like that. But you're probably never going to have a blowout success in this game in particular, just for a small handful of reasons. So there's a lot of granularity in the OB. It's a deep dive into what they thought they knew at the time, what we thought we knew about both sides and both sides' capabilities, and I think the forces are relatively well structured out of that. This comes on the back of some other SPI games that were, messing around with the theme. There was, I think, Full the Gap came out before this, and if it didn't, it came out almost immediately after. So there's a whole swag of games that took some of the mechanics from this system and applied them and refined them, and there are some that leveraged the research that went into the game. So I like the OB. I think it gives you a good feel. I'm sure you could tweak it and change it and make it fit 78, 80, 85 or later if you really wanted to. I think it's a good framework for you to try and experiment and play, assuming you want to deal with some of the issues that there are with the game. So, having talked about OB in general terms, and then when I talk about OB, I mean, there's a no page numbers. Yes, here we go. 40-page document here that has scenarios and OB and org charts for all the different formations, the commands, the divisions, where the cities those divisions were in, the structure of everything, the situation briefing, really detailed, relatively thoughtful stuff. So you feel like you're playing what the situation was at the time, so which is kind of cool. But you've still got to get into the conflict. We've still got to resolve combat. We've still got to look at how the air war works. And there's an entire naval game which I did not play because it just looked like a disaster. I got 9 comments here. We're going to check in real quick. Looks like you guys might be chatting in amongst yourselves. You go for it, fellas. That is awesome. Good to see some new guys in here. Some folks I don't know. Oh, Stigler, you're funny. Central Front series. I can't do that, my friend. Yes, I can. Actually, I can. Anyway, so different scale. So let's keep going about the system. So let's look at air combat first. I had some challenges and issues with the air combat game, mainly because of lack of clarity in the rules and some of the sequencing that you need to look at. You got to look at really carefully. With SPI case-based rule systems, the first rule is going to it's going to set the bar, and then the others are generally either exceptions or clarifications or amplifications of the core rule. And when you then get into, well, let's talk about in the rules, you'll have a rule for air-to-air combat, a rule for air-to-ground combat, a rule for intercepting, a rule for anti-air, and there may be some precedents set up here that typically apply all the way through. So it becomes a very thought-provoking and challenging exercise to go through, even though the actual system is very, very straightforward. And I can hopefully explain it in about 60 seconds. If I can remember, and I may excuse myself from trying to do this. Let's see if I can find the right charts. I did find some updated and revised charts that I think are minor modifications and updates to the rules that are probably a better fit for the game and make things a little cleaner. But every air-to-air, once you allocate your air, you're putting them into 3 buckets. And so there's air superiority, there's some intercepting, and then there's the ground units that are going to go into a given air zone. So the map's split up into several air zones. And so you allocate intercept forces, you allocate air superiority forces, you allocate intercept forces, and then you go through and do those intercepts that are going to go and attack the actual ground, air-to-ground strike craft like A-10s and things like that. So typically what's going to happen is I'm going to probably get this around the wrong way. In the air superiority phase, the Americans are going to typically win that unless they roll really badly. And then they're going to drop down into, or are they not going to win that? Yeah, I think they're going to have some challenges with that. Sorry, then they go down, the ones that are successful go down into the intercept phase, and that's where their categories and their ratings are significantly better than the Soviets, and they will then be successful there, and that will allow them to go and mess up the ground attack support craft that are going through. I think that's how it basically works out every time. Because you'll look at 2 aircraft that might be equivalent on a air-to-air basis, fighter versus fighter, but because one's in air superiority, it's got a very different air superiority number to one that doesn't. One that is also good at intercept. Let me see if I can show you an aircraft here that would make sense. So if I would show you this, we can see here. Here's a F5. It has an air superiority rating of 10 and an intercept number of 5. So that, I think that's how it works. So pretty powerful air superiority ratings, mediocre intercept ratings. So if you get the air superiority, those and you beat your opposition, go through the rounds of combat, they're all going home. those guys that are left can drop down into the intercept mode, and then you'll have combat there, and that gets a little bit closer. If you can win there on a kind of box by box basis, it's got this track of boxes, and you drop units down into boxes, and then they go head to head. It takes quite a while. It's a good hour of gameplay to, I would say, for me doing it solo anyway, to go through all of the air sectors. And then you get this pretty interesting opportunity then, once you win or clear the interception sector, to then go down into the strike craft and wreak havoc in amongst them. So that's just the kind of the opening stage of the very first part of the turn. Then you're going to roll into the game, and you're going to have movement and all the rest of it. And as you all probably know, you've all heard that movement and combat all happen basically at the same time, because combat is a function of movement points, just like NATO Division Commander is or was. So, but let's stick with the aircraft for a minute. So what we're doing now is, as we're playing the game, there's choices to allocate in the combat phase, to allocate strike aircraft. And those strike aircraft are going to have to run the gauntlet of SAMs or AA on the other side. I can't remember the names of the American AA units. And each division or headquarters is going to have a range that they can protect on. There are AA units that can protect divisions. And they're probably not divisional headquarters, they're probably army headquarters is what I'm thinking. And so they have to, the units have to fly this gauntlet of flak to get in and have a strike. Well, flak ratings vary from A to D. There's 4 types. And I'll roll from 1 through 6. You're potentially going to take either step loss or damage, and you are going to have some modifiers to that based on the group's interception rating, and so you're taking an average of the rating. Now there are these interesting units that are basically escorts, I would call them, that they have a 0 air superiority rating, but they have a really high interception rating, and they don't have a factor for ground strikes. And their sole purpose, from what I've been able to work out in the game, is to bump up the average on these crappy units. Like A-10s are okay, but there's some air to ground units like Harriers that are going to get chewed up pretty badly. So you pair them or group them, and then you average up their interception rating, and that is going to enable them to survive better than if the Harriers or whatever aircraft were flying in by themselves. That took a long time for me to get that right and work that out, and I actually had to end up direct messaging on Twitter Mark Herman to clarify that was how the rule read, was how the rule is and how it was written and what its intent was, because there are several folks who've played this game a lot who said, no, that's not how it works. It works differently, and let's not talk about how it works differently, because it ended up being that was wrong and that this averaging thing is right. So those rules, the rule book, the structure of the rules is great. It's classic SBI case-based system, and if you like case-based systems, you can find stuff relatively easily. It did feel like it needed another month of work and tuning and writing, just to kind of clean it up, maybe more, but it worked pretty well, much better than some of Mark Herman's other rule books, like looking at you, Pacific War, much cleaner. So once you understood that, then the air war went pretty quickly, and then the game, how air impacted on the battlefield, made a lot more sense to me too, because otherwise everything was dying and nothing was getting through. And that just didn't seem right to me. I imagine there was very high loss rates, as you get in those technology swing parts of the world, parts of time where great AA is not being defeated by better aircraft, or better aircraft are beating weaker AA, and there's that swing in technology. I think this game kind of caught a wave of high capability or perceived high capability AA, coming off the back of, I even went and was doing research and reading on the Vietnam War, because we were just coming out of the Vietnam War when this was being made, and so there was a lot of churn on how tactics were used and what mechanisms worked to avoid anti-aircraft fire and ground-to-air missile systems in the Vietnam War, and that I think certainly influenced. Plus the research obviously influenced the game a lot. So it kind of looked like it was just a slaughterhouse for both sides' air forces, but really it's not. It's really bad, but it's not a slaughterhouse. So once you get that all sorted out and you get into the entire game, actual mechanics of fighting, you've got this maximum number of movement points you can move. If you want to move more than that, then you start incurring fatigue, which have penalties on your ability to attack and your DRMs on your attacks and things like that. And so what happens then is that you flip over to the land combat results table, which was not linear in terms of its result set, and that was the biggest complaint with the game, was that folks said, look, this is bullshit. Why I'm better off attacking it 1-to-1 than I am at 3-to-1. There's lots of justifications and support for why that should be the case or is not the case. Excuse me. And I elected to use a somewhat gently modified CRT that someone had worked on. I took the time to build, and it has a great color-coded table here that allows me to, I've got a lot of comments here, but I'll get to you in a minute. I'm sure you're just talking amongst yourselves. A lot of clarity, and you can run through a combat very, very quickly, but there are lots of steps to go through just in terms of DRMs and assessments. Size of force matters. It's going to impact the DRMs. It's also going to impact the losses you take. So if you have a battalion or a where is it? It's a size differential. I can't remember what it is. What the size difference is now. Whether it's I think it's regiments versus divisions. Then you've got to take two-step losses instead of one-step loss. So if you're a division, all the results that are shared here, results for divisions being attacked, and so there's some doubling of losses for the Allies in particular if they get caught with their pants down, which happens. So, but where the game all kind of when you look at it and you see all these forces, and I know I didn't play the best Soviet offense, but when I looked at it, I was like, okay, I'm going to try and go this way and this way and this way, but basically these three armies. And you don't get chem on in most of the scenarios, you don't have access to chem on turn one. There might be one scenario where you do. You don't have access to nukes on turn one. You've got to go through a rolling exercise to get to that. So most of that availability happens on turn 2 or maybe turn 3. And that makes sense because you've got to move to contact, and some of the first attacks, they're okay. You're rolling through some weak units like the ACR and stuff like that, and that's okay. But once you get a weight of forces up and you're all trying to fight, there's a lot of regiments and brigades of units either swapping themselves in and out during a turn, so that they're pulling a weakened unit out and pushing a fresh regiment in, or you're putting a unit with another unit right behind it, and the Soviets are trying to bash their heads against that wall. I was not able to work out, using the combat results table here, a clean way to get, because you really don't have a lot of air support as the Soviets ground air support. The Americans do, or the Allies do, The NATO does, I should say. And they also have the choppers, which can be powerful. So this set of results in here, if I don't know if I can show you this very clearly, but even at, let's see, even at 5 to 1, and we want to roll low in this table, even at 5 to 1 here, which is this column here, you see that column there? At 5 to 1, those A's, there are A's, which means the attacker takes a loss. There's contact results, and there are these D results, which are defender must lose his step and retreat, which I think is going to be subject to the terrain that it's in. And you've got these contact losses. So, and you've also got an A stuck in down low there. So even at 5 to 1, I've got in that band of having a 7 with 2d6. A 7 is a good result because you get a D that kills something. But then an 8, a 9, and a 10, and an 11, and a 12 are not good. And if I'm going to roll 2d6 on an average roll of 7, and I want DRMs to boost my number, I probably don't. I want to reduce my number. But then if I reduce my number, let's say I'm at 4 to 1, and I roll, on average I roll a 7. If I get 3 DRMs down and reduce it, I get a contact, which means basically no effect. If I get a 7 and I because you can choose to have the DRM go up or down, right? But you got to declare it beforehand. At 4 to 1, if I roll a 7 and I go up 3, I take an attack or loss. So you're really stuck in this freaking no man's land where no matter which way you go, quite possibly you're in trouble. So you have to roll either really, really low, and I'm talking on a 4 to 1, I've got to get to a 0. Yeah, I mean, so it's hard. So what happens is you end up in this sort of morass where it's stalemate, where nothing happens. And even if I do get a D, that regiment is going to take 2-step losses, and he's going to take 1 more before he dies, I believe, or maybe it's 2 and that kills him. I don't know. I'd have to check. So that dude potentially can pull out, and a fresh guy can go in, or the line can all move back 1 hex, and we get this double depth. So that you can't have this exploit movement and say, okay, I'm going to move 5 movement points, spend 10 movement points to do a prepared attack, or whatever it is. Maybe it's 5 movement points. I don't know exactly how much it is anymore. And then knock that guy out, and then get a breakthrough, pay the extra movement points to go through the breakthrough hex, and then go and attack again. Pretty quickly, I'm chewing up and accumulating the fatigue, which is a negative DRM and negatively affects you. So when you're breaking through and you've got 2 divisions or 3 divisions, and then you go and do this attack, and now you're not at 4 to 1, you're at 2 to 1. Oops. So it gets really, the game kind of, to me, seems to bog down pretty quickly. It's pretty easy as the NATO player, I think, to totally tie up the Soviet player. If you don't have chem, and if you don't have these missile strikes and stuff on the very, very first turn, so that you can take out or negate some air factors, and then maybe get some air into the game. I think that's the only way you can kind of mitigate that this CRT issue. And I know we're spending a lot of time on CRT, but it's kind of critical to what I think is fundamentally problematic with the game, but it's not bad. It's just I haven't worked out how to do it yet, how to play it well yet. So CRT, attacking, doing stuff, chemicals, fatigue is an issue. Yeah, because if you look at these, you both sides tally up their DRMs, and then you net them out. And Chem Warfare is only good for 3 turns too. So first turn you get a +3. and then electronic warfare, you got to roll for that. Yeah, division versus brigade, I get a +2 as the attacker. Step loss condition, that's gonna be a modifier. No zones of control, etc., etc. There's all sorts of different things, right? First turn benefits are there's a +5 or a +3 or something like that. So this can be challenging, and the air war it's insane. It's deadly and it's very hard to keep track of too, because you're moving units over onto this track. They're all fighting, and you're turning things sideways and putting counters underneath or putting them on top, depending on whether or not they're damaged or took a step loss or whatever the case may be. There's not enough counters. There's not enough information counters in the actual counters stacks sheets to service the game, just for that. And then when you go back to base, you've got to make sure, well, where am I going to put them, right? I've got to keep in mind that I might get a missile strike, so I can't put all my good units, whatever they are, F4s or F5s or F15s or F-whatevers, or my MiG-21s or anything like that. I can't put them all in one spot because I might get a missile strike or a chem strike, and it could take out an entire airfield, and they're gone. There are air replacement points and stuff like that they really don't make a huge difference. But there's a lot of work in keeping the administrative side of the air war straight, particularly because there's not enough counters. Okay, let's see. So logistics is interesting because they have these mobile supply heads for the Soviets. You've got to shuffle them along the road. They can use rail, but you've got to move so they have a range that can go back to a major road, or a range that can go to a railroad, and the Soviets are going to convert the railroad. So it's kind of an artifice to make supply difficult instead of just doing it some other way. I found the supply rules kind of wonky. It's easy for the Allies to, if they have the ability to get through, which I didn't really try to do because I didn't want to risk losing any more air to SAMs. You can triple stack these railway engineers with a forward supply head and just book them up the road, and then pretty much everything stays relatively in supply, because it's not that hard to get back to a main road or an autobahn to get the supply, but the air can try and interdict that and then push it, make it move 5 hexes back or whatever the case may be. And being out of supply is not pretty. It cuts everything, does massive sorts of damage to stuff. All right, I'm getting dry here. So logistically, it's a light touch, I would say, and it's probably not terribly authentic. It doesn't really make me feel as the Soviet player that I just have a week's supply or 2 weeks supply, and I gotta crack through the line and make it happen quickly. Probably would have been smart of me to tell you what the game scale is. I think it's weekly turns. Does that sound right? I'm not sure if it's weekly or 2-day turns now, but nevertheless, you do have this ability to pretty much keep everything in supply if you're smart about it. It's also easy for the Bundeswehr to leave units behind, and they're isolated and they're having their challenges with supply. But if you can plonk them on a road, you've got to pull units back, and you have to kill that unit or block the zones of control, which means you're taking units off the line, or even if you bring crappy Polish units up or something else to surround that, it's distracting you from the main effort. So there's a bit of that going on too, right? There's a whole bunch of comments here. Let's see what's going on. Yeah, JTM. Let's see. Yeah, you guys are all just chit-chatting amongst yourselves, which is awesome. Yeah, they may. There's lots of commentary about what Soviet doctrine was. No one knows for a fact. That this game, the way this game is structured, it's not available turn 1. And I don't think it would be wise to use them in turn one because you don't have a weight of forces up in the fight to allow you to take advantage of the rolling out of the barracks surprise attack, or the slow build up, or the both sides are ready to go to war and really get at it. That it just doesn't work that way at this scale anyway. So that's the way the game's designed. So historical narrative, I think I in terms of scripting, I feel like the game is posited as a, oh my gosh, watch the Red Hordes destroy and that's great. That may be the way you're trained, but that may not be necessarily be the reality of what was on the ground with the Soviets, and it's not how the game mechanics work. Or it's not what the researchers found when they did their research. In '78. What was I going to say? Crap. Scripting. So, the game I think is posited as the Red Hordes are coming, and can you save the world type of thing, and as the Red Hordes, can you smash the evil capitalists and destroy them? The reality is, just like the CFS system, this game system is I think leans towards giving NATO a leg up. Obviously both. Definitely in the air war. This is prior to a lot of the really slick aircraft being available, F-15s and whatnot, and the Strike Eagles and stuff like that. There are some of them, but they're very few, versus where Third World War is set a little bit later, and it has more of the gee-whizzery of the particularly the American air capabilities. And as I said, the SAM technology is off the chain, and for both sides, and very, very, very deadly. So there's this that feels like it's scripted towards NATO ultimately being successful, despite a tragic and difficult fight. Although based on my single gameplay, doesn't feel like it's that hard as the NATO player. I think I'd like to play this again. But I'm certainly probably going to do it solo on Vassal versus setting it all up, just because it takes a concerted effort and a lot of time to play it solo. I've got some guys who are interested in playing it here locally, but I'm not sure we'll get them all together on a regular enough basis to kind of crank this thing out. Okay. So that said, with this scripting, I really feel though that the story you get out of this thing is pretty epic, because you're making all the political roles for the different allies and the different Warsaw Pact members to see what level of commitment they're actually going to have. You're fighting that desperate air war. You're trying to rush units to the front. There's very little around to protect from Wurzburg to basically to Hamburg. So you're thin on the ground until you start pushing. You start pushing more units up the front. The replayability aspect of this game, I don't necessarily know. I don't know that it's a game you're going to want to set up 5 times and play or 10 times and play unless you're an absolute aficionado of it and you deeply understand the game. I think it certainly would play a lot faster with more experience. I found once I got going on the air war that it went a lot faster. The gameplay is pretty quick because at some point a lot of the Soviet units are just creaking at the knees with fatigue or step losses or whatever the case may be, and the Allies have no incentive to attack anybody and no incentive to actually move anything if they don't have a hole. So some turns can go quite fast. But I think there's replayability there in terms of exploring options, and I think once you work out how to leverage that CRT as the Warsaw Pact player, I think then you can have a great experience with the game. Uh, Playtime ad nauseum. I mean, this is a monster's monster. There's a lot of hours that are going to go into this. I told you it was an hour for the air war section of each turn. I think I'm being reasonably generous, and I was playing pretty fast and loose as well. So there's that. So it's probably every bit of three hours or 4 hours a turn would be my guess. Um, you do the math on however many turns there are in the game. There's 30 turns in the game or something like that. I think I showed you all the components. I think the components are actually excellent for the quality, the period of time, and what they're trying to achieve. I think the rule writing's pretty good. And they're relatively consumable and digestible overall. One designer said to me that he felt like that this game was a framework that really wasn't finished. That may be the case, but there's a game in here that you can play, and it works. So I've enjoyed it. Let me just see what questions we've got. Okay, probably. I'm just reading the questions here. Sorry, guys. Yeah, so I think that all is good. All right, so let's change gears. Let's, unless you have questions about the next war, I'm going to jump on to Liberty Roads. Talk about that real quickly. I'm probably not going to get into as much detail about that, but I will certainly give it a quick overview in terms of my experiences so far. French manufacturer, Hexasim. I think you've probably all seen this before. The Advanced After Combat podcast has reviewed it in detail. They love it. I'll let me do the quick and dirty commentary on this and tell you that I believe that this game system is probably one of the cleanest and tightest light wargaming systems I've seen. I'd say it's arguably better than the standard combat system from SCS from MMP. I think it's the rules are just as clear. The gameplay is more authentic, I think, but only at the scale that Liberty Roads is set in, which is the D-Day landings and the the conquering, crossing the Rhine and liberating France and destroying Germany. Getting a bunch of VPs. The rules are, like I said, the rules are for a French game. The rules are actually really, really good. I'm just trying to dig through here to get to a map. So I think it's every bit as good, if not better than SCS, and mainly because of the sequence of play. There are only three things I think that make this game significantly different from any other hex encounter panzer pusher thing. One is there's no zones control. Two is the CRT is somewhat unique. That there actually is four things, and there's a tactical chits to be used in the game, and the fourth thing is the concept of the Pluto marker, which is making the Pluto marker and the Hitler track together. So the Pluto marker, which drives where the Allies can play their forces and use their forces effectively. Because it has a range. You put the Pluto marker down anywhere on the map, and anywhere within a certain range of that hex, you will have the ability to use these tactical chits and take advantage of those tactical chits. And then the Hitler track obviously is as the Germans lose things and start dying off and failing, that impacts reinforcements and tactical chit availability. It's really smart, clever little system. The CRT has a standard odds-based system with column shifts for attack chits that are used, and then one or two minor DRMs that are usually focused around veteran ranking of the units, and you'll get a result. It'll be no loss to the attacker, one step loss to the defender, but then you go across to the attacker defender tactical result, and they're banded by color. And if you have a certain type of unit, you're allowed to choose from the result as the attacker, up or down, whether or not you get to exploit, whether it's a contact, whether you're engaged, whether it's the defender takes extra losses. And the defender, if they have a particular type of unit, and they'll have a colored band. So if you roll a 7 and you go across, you may, as a defender, be able to go down to 8, up to 6, up to 5, up to 4 even, perhaps. And that may be, something good happens or something bad happens, right? In addition to your combat result. So that's a nice little mechanic that gives a element of differentiation to the game system. The no Zox means lots of opportunity for breakthroughs, lots of opportunities for exploiting, but everyone's got very, very limited movement points. So it really does make it hard to get these big exploits and breakthroughs, which is so endemic in the SCS system, where you've got panzers that can attack 5 times in a turn. They get to move. They get to move. They get to move and overrun, attack, exploit, overrun, attack there, and so on and so forth. So I think this system really does a great job of representing this particular theater and this conflict, and it sets the decision levels at a fairly high level. Your OB is pretty accurate. You've got full intelligence of what's going on in the game, so there's no hidden units or anything like that. And you're allowed to look through stacks. Pretty straightforward player objectives as well. I talked a little bit about the CRT. Logistics is just tied, traced back to a headquarters, which has to trace back to a source. That can get problematic at times, particularly if you're trying to land in the northern marshes, or if you're trying to throw supply across a river. That is not able to be done unless you've got a pontoon bridge laid out, which the headquarter has to flip to do that. So it deals with logistics in a very abstract manner. There's no moving supply around or anything like that. I'm looking for a map here. I'll just show you some of the artwork of the map, if you haven't seen it already. This is the south of France. And there are other tracks that you got to keep in touch with as well for the Free French and things like that. Is Le Havre area. It's not a huge game. It doesn't take up a lot of space. It plays really fast. Once you get cranking and you get through that first landing turn, it plays super, super fast. And I actually like this game more than I like their East Front game. What was that called? Road to Victory or something? I forget. I don't have it in here. Anyway, I like that game. It's called something Roads. That's kind of the theme. Really enjoyed that game, but it is a game that really relies on first turn being done absolutely right with your tactical chits and allocations, and I think it would become a little bit mechanistic there, because you've got to do certain things no matter what. Here, I think you have a lot more flexibility and a lot more replayability, because you've got dozens of places where you can try and land, lots of different explorations to go through, and you have an expansion module that allows you to explore what happened if you land in 43, which is one of the things that I do want to try. Probably set that up solo and try that solo, unless I can convince Steve to play it with me. You're probably all familiar with the counters. They have the divisional logos or badges or flags or emblems or whatever you want to call them on on every division. It's very cool, very artistic. It's a little busy, but that's okay. Playtime, like I said, I think it plays super fast. I just found a counter from next war that escaped, so let's put that back in the box. And that's it. I told you it plays fast. What else can I tell you about? Like I said, the rules are really straightforward as well. Let's see here. Is that Clay? Hey, dude, how you doing? Oh, you guys are having a fine time here. That's cool. All right. So, yeah, I sold off that Air War game. Not Air War, Central America, I think. Pretty interesting, but I'm not sure that it works that great. I am excited about playing Gulf Strike though. So I think this game, like I said, it's more in the vein of the standard combat system versus, now the Clay's here, we can say the word GOS. It's certainly not a GOS-based system at all. It doesn't have that level of detail or complexity by any means. And but if you want to play a Normandy game, Normandy landings through to the conquering of the Reich type of game, I think that you have a system here that it really allows you to play that in a manageable amount of time with a lot of fun, without a lot of rules overhead and a lot of pain. And it's a pretty cool little system. It does give you a good flavor for the decisions and the challenges that were put in front of the folks who are actually making the choices. I think it does a good job of that, and I don't think that it's not a gamey game either. There's not a lot of areas where you can kind of screw the system too badly. Whereas I think with the Mighty Endeavor and some of those other titles at that scale, there are some goofy things you can try and do. All right, dudes, I'm probably going to roll. Yeah, hey, Kyle, I'm actually reading the Aegean Strike rules right now. I think, I would say it's better than, this is more enjoyable than Fortress Europa. I've got Belkowski's To the Reich or Onto the Reich or something like that. I want to play that, despite its somewhat hideous map. And give that a shot and see what that's like. But as in terms of modern games with modern components and modern artwork and clean, crisp rules and some thoughtfulness put into it to make it a playable two-mapper, I think this is probably the single best Normandy game of Normandy landings through to the Conquering of the Reich I've played. In total, so there's that. All right, I will talk to you guys soon, and I trust that all of you will stay well, and we'll look forward to doing some actual live play instead of me just prattling on. Talk to you soon, guys. Cheers.